Right. Let's do it this way. Let's call it aviation. History of aviation in Kenya, because the planes started being used in very simple fields before airports were built. But the first of all, aviation is a form of transport, and it has become very important today in terms of passenger travel and moving of cargo, particularly the perishable products and those that require urgent delivery. So in Kenya, the first planes to come came from Europe, particularly England, and they were landing on water. From Europe, they crossed Mediterranean, landed near Cairo on River Nile, landing on water. And then from Cairo, they came to Juba in the South Sudan, that is now southern Sudan. And then from Juba, they landed in Kisumu, which had, they were not called airports, they were called landing areas. And that went on. And the journey, the journey for the planes headed towards South Africa. They went landing in water bodies from one place to the other until they reached Cape Town. So that went on until technology improved. And as Nairobi was growing, particularly after it became a center of this area of East Africa, both administrative and commercial, there was need for air connection. And there was also need that arose to develop local air transport. The settlers were establishing themselves in the so-called White Highlands at that time, needed to hop from here and there. They were also enjoying themselves over the weekend, and they brought in some light aircraft, personal aircraft, to go from one place to the other within Kenya. And therefore, Nairobi needed air service from where to start. And the planes were taking off and landing. The first landing strip in Nairobi was in Dagoretti Corner, a place called, by then the place was called Karandini. And today there is a market. The council market has a name called Karandini Market. So historically it is still connected. But that general area was the first landing ground. The landing strip was behind the shopping center, not where the market is. And then Karadine was like a barrier separating the native area, which was then Kiambu on the right. That Dagoretti Corner Market, that one was in Kiambu. And the left, where you have the Met office and all the way to Race Course, was part of Nairobi, and it was a Mzungu area. So the landing ground, it was not anything other than open landing ground. Dusty in the sunny season, and wet and muddy during the cool season. But it was maram, so they could use it, and it was maintained well. Now, there was nothing else except that landing ground, a few houses for service, and they treated it as a temporary measure for that one. And as operations are going on in that area, landing and taking off of light aircraft. Let me explain. It was for light aircraft. Another area was found suitable for aviation operations, and this is what we call today Wilson Airport. And this was purely civilian. There was no military activity, as I mentioned at Wilson, at Eastleigh Airport. Now, these civilian operations were private operators, people who owned planes as a form of transport, and others who would operate those planes and get paid by passengers or move cargo from here, including mail. So a lot of operations went on, and they were able to fly as technology was improving. They started flying as far as Mombasa, Malindi, and towards the East African countries, Arusha area, Mwanza, towards Uganda, and they could fly and return. They also flew internally to areas like today's Masai Mara Reserve and the northern parts of Kenya for tourism and also for pleasure visits.
When you say civilian, who are we talking about?
Of course, at that time, it was exclusively the Europeans, particularly the British officialdom, the British settlers, the British businessmen who had established their presence in the colony of Kenya.
So technically our first sort of airports, let me say it's the lakeside, then Dagoretti Corner,
Yes.
before we came to Wilson.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, because there was the Eastleigh for the overseas travel. The big jets landed at Eastleigh, and it was the first properly maintained airport. As time went on, a tarmac was laid, and some navigation aids were installed, and bigger planes coming from other countries overseas were able to land at Eastleigh and then take off towards some other countries, mainly towards the southern African countries like the then Rhodesias, which are today Zambia and Zimbabwe, and on to South Africa.
So at Isili, was it also civilian or just military?
It started as both civilian and military, but the role of civilian was increasing more than the military. The military was more active during the wars, particularly the Second World War of the 1940s, as it ended. But the role of the civilian activities were more and continued as the industry of aviation expanded in Kenya. Now, as Eastleigh was going on, Wilson became very, very, very busy for the light aircraft. And for Eastleigh, as independence was approaching, it was found that there was need for a bigger facility to handle international flights. And a determination was made to establish one in Embakasi area. And when the decision was made, Embakasi at that time was an empty ground. It was flat and expansive. So they planned both for that moment and for future expansion, and a big runway plus the terminal building. Now, for the runway, for the construction of the runway, the British government used Mau Mau labor. It is important to remember that the runway at Embakasi was made by hand by Mau Mau laborers. There were labor camps established around the construction site, and there was very few machines used. And the labor used uh, placed the huge stones. They used the hammers and mattocks to break down and spread the construction materials, and it was only the laying of tarmac which came much later. So the digging of the foundation, the laying of construction materials before the tarmac was made by human labor provided by Mau Mau detainees. Now that construction work ended in 1959, and Embakasi Airport, which is today Jomo Kenyatta, we first have the old airport, as we know, which is approachable, or rather, the terminal buildings are near the Kenya Airways headquarters side, including the airbase next to it. That is the old terminal building, which has been used from 1959 all the way to 1978, when what we call today Jomo Kenyatta Airport, just across the tarmac, what we use today, was opened officially. It was constructed and opened officially in April 1978.
Okay. Just clarify, when you say Embakasi, are you referring to where JKIA is now, or it was a bit of a different location?
No, it is generally where the JKIA is located. The runway is the same. It has been extended from the time it was first constructed. It has been widened. Today's runway at Jomo Kenyatta is 4.5 kilometers long, and it is 45 meters wide. And we have one runway built since that time, and there is pressure on it. And I think measures are being taken to do a second runway somewhere within the site. There is only one runway for the moment, and it is surrounded by taxiways where planes, first of all, go and set themselves to land. And when they land, they taxi along into the terminal building.
From the one built by the Mau Mau, who were not compensated in any way, uh, is it that we have not thought to build another?
I think this becomes both a political and an economic decision. I think attempts had been made to construct both another runway, a second runway, including terminal building. But I think this is something that is needed, and it will be done. Attempts have been made, but we have not so far succeeded.
Okay. Let's go back to Wilson Airport. Who who started Wilson Airport? Who owns Wilson Airport? I know there are different airlines there. Um, of course, I guess they need to be in the same place. But overall, who started it, and who owns it or owned it when it started?
All right, Wilson Airport, as we had mentioned earlier, was initially called Nairobi West Airfield because it was located in that general area, Nairobi West, and it became very active, mainly by private operators. And even today, Wilson Airport is sustained by private air operators. It's a very busy airport. In fact, the landings and takes off per hour far exceeds the volume of Jomo Kenyatta. At one time, if I'm not wrong, it was rated as one of the busiest airports in this general in Africa. And I think even today, the taking off and landings occur literally every hour of the day. Now, it started off and was boosted by private air operators. So, private air operators were allowed. First of all, let me clarify, it's a public facility. But by the nature of its operations, air operators, particularly the ones who've been there very long, including the original ones, acquired or built facilities like hangars and service bays to assist in their operations. And they were given plots to develop. And there, as the case is today at Wilson, a lot of operators all along it have established such facilities in plots that they own. But overall, they own them under lease from the government. Overall, it's a government facility. It is owned and operated by the Kenya Airports Authority, and the air operations are controlled by the Kenya Civil Aviation Authority with a tower there. Yes. Now, as during the Second World War, the airport, Wilson Airport, it was still known as Nairobi West Airfield, became very busy. And after the war, the military operations, the military side of operations, it became less and less. But the private operations grew. So one of the pioneers of Britain was a Mr. and Mrs. Wilson. And she was a pioneer. She did a lot. She organized the development. She organized the users very usefully. And after the Second World War, many users who had formed an association chose her, and her husband passed away, and she remained in charge of the Wilson Airways operations. And all the air operators resolved to honor her name and her husband by naming her, by giving the what do you call it? Nairobi West Airfield to be renamed after the both Mary Wilson and her husband. And now, to make it short, it is called Wilson Airport. And the most important person in this name was Mrs. Mary Wilson, who pioneered and worked very hard to develop it and to organize it for the private air operators to the way it is today, even today. So it bears the name of Wilson Airport in honor of Mary Wilson.
Yeah. And finally, when did, not the Africans or the Kenyans in this case, when did we start flying ourselves? Because, like you said, it was mostly for the Brits. And then there was independence, and now we have aircrafts and runways, but no one has flown.
Most of the Kenyan operators of Kenyan origin started much later. And as history has proven, those who took up the career either started as assistants of the pioneering British air operators at Wilson, employees they rose up. They were trained in flight. There were also flight schools which did the basics, and Africans started slowly adopting this as a career. Now, um, when we formed after independence, the Kenya Air Force, because of the training offered, it opened opportunities for many Kenyans to train flying and maintenance of aircraft. And it offered also an opportunity for them to acquire a bit of experience, which was useful in private air operations. And they were absorbed, most of them, into private air operators who are found at Wilson Airport. I think the time flying became common was during what you call the student airlift. That is just before independence, when young Kenyans were taken through flight to America, to US, uh, mainly pioneered by the late Tom Mboya, and many Kenyans were able to fly to American universities. It is normally we call it the student airlift. And at the same time, a lot of students were taken to Eastern Europe, mainly to East Germany, to Hungary, Ukraine, and so on, Poland, in a program pioneered by the late Jaramogi Oginga Odinga. I think that is the time when Kenyans became aware that there is a new way, there is a way of traveling, and because only a few could do so, it became like an exceptional thing. And I think even today, okay, it's dying away, but there is still a myth about flying. It's not completely gone about flying. There is a feeling of exceptionalism.